I am Father Dick Mahalik. I'm walking around Ender's Island to help integrate scenes of the island today with scenes in the illuminations as we head to the chapel to begin our exploration of the illuminations of the Way of the Cross done by Jed Gibbons. I'd like to welcome you to the third installment of explaining the illuminations here at St. Edmund's Retreat. The illuminations were done by Jed Gibbons, and I am Father Dick Mahalik, and I'm happy to kind of give an orientation on the final 5 stations of the cross. And we're beginning this particular presentation with the 11th station where Jesus is nailed to the cross. And in this illumination, a number of things are going on. Jesus is being offered a sponge that has been dipped into gall and wine, and he declines to take that. You also will notice around the border a number of insects, and these insects, when you examine their species, you discover they're mud daubers. What is a mud dauber? Well, mud daubers are notorious for they sting their prey, and after stinging their prey, the prey becomes paralyzed. Then the mud dauber takes that victim and puts it in like a little tomb, a shell with an egg, and that paralyzed victim becomes the nourishment for new life later on. So it's kind of a fascinating tie with Jesus being paralyzed and literally prevented from movement by being nailed to the cross. And of course, if you try to apply the station in some ways, you can ask yourself, well, how do the things that I do or fail to do paralyze or prevent people from experiencing peace and serenity in their lives? And if you just think about a number of things that would be common, our anger, our hatred, our prejudice, our insistence on having our own way. The list could go on. Each of those things, in a sense, is like a nail that is driven into the life of another that prevents them from being the full person they might be capable of becoming. Also, the border, besides the mud daubers, we've got kind of a lattice work with hooks in it. You know, those hooks. What is it that is hooking us, so to speak, preventing us from being the full potential that we might be? What is it that nails us to our cross? The 12th station, Jesus dies on the cross, and a interesting facet of this particular illumination is how Jed Gibbons has taken the title frame and has ripped it open, and there are a number of stones falling out of that frame. If you recall the very first station where we have the pillar, the obelisk, that's supposed to represent the people of God, the church, all cemented together. This 12th station where Jesus dies, at the moment Jesus dies on the cross, the scriptures tell us that the veil in the temple is torn from top to bottom. And it is the moment in which the high priest is offering the sacrificial lamb, that John's gospel describes Jesus as the sacrificial lamb, the Lamb of God. So the context obviously is being caught just even in the title. If you look into the background around the cross with Jesus, you'll notice that we have three Marys clinging to Jesus in death as they had clung to him in life. And we also have John, the beloved disciple, the beloved apostle, with his head leaning against Jesus' chest. One of the Marys at the very lower echelons is her hair is drying the blood off Jesus' feet, very much in parallel with the story we had heard earlier of Mary, who had come to anoint the feet of Jesus with her tears and then wipe and dry his feet with her hair. So those are wonderful re-engagements of earlier scenes in the gospel. In the background, we have a ship that is being bounced upon the waves and very much torn with the tension that is of that sea and the turmoil. And the idea is to capture the spiritual turmoil of life that must have happened to all of those followers of Jesus as they saw him move from being the vibrant preacher and healer to being someone who was being executed and put to death as a criminal. We also have in the border a number of items that help us appreciate. There's an anchor which has a broken chain. The anchor is an early symbol of the cross, and there's a lance, the lance that was used to pierce the side of the Savior, from which blood and water flowed, which the church sees as sacramental signs of the Eucharist and the sacrament of baptism. 13th station is Jesus is taken down from the cross. And as you get up close to the illumination, it's very definitely a winter scene. It is snowing. And Mary is holding in almost that Pietà scene Jesus' dead body in a tender composure. The border has evergreens. And Jed Gibbons intended the images to evoke a memory of a nativity scene. And so you can, and when you get up close, you'll see near the arm of Jesus the three gifts of the Magi: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Gold to symbolize king, frankincense, God, and myrrh, something to anoint someone who is dying. We're told that an old legend maintains that the day that Jesus was born, barren branches bloomed for the first time in a long time. And the psalm that Jed Gibbons thought and really kind of held his attention as he painted this illumination was the 51st Psalm. Wash away my iniquities, cleanse me of my sins, make me whiter than snow. And you'll notice in the border, they look almost like monstrance. They're really, or ostromsoriums, they're actually reliquaries, and they contain, one of them is the Sacred Heart, the other is the Immaculate Heart. And the Edmondites, before we were known as the Fathers and Brothers of St. Edmund, Father Mouard, our founder, actually had our title the Oblates of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And he chose that name and those patrons as a vehicle of bringing back people alienated from the church. The original purpose of the Edmondites was to bring back to God, to the church, and to one's neighbor, people who were for various reasons alienated. And so the illumination really helps us think about in our own lives, how do we reflect the love of the Sacred Heart and the Immaculate Heart? How are we instruments that are building bridges, or are we further alienating people from one another, from God, from the church? The 14th station is Jesus is placed in the tomb, and like the 13th station, it has parallels to scenes in the Nativity of the Lord. Here, it's framed in a way that gives you almost the idea of the stable, where Jesus in the stable was laid in a manger. Here he is being laid on a slab, his tomb. We also, as Joseph, Saint Joseph, Mary's husband, Jesus' foster father, may have held a lantern so that the shepherds could adore the newborn king. Here we have Joseph of Arimathea holding a lantern so that the mourners can mourn the death of Jesus. The scene that is used to frame it is our seaside chapel. And if you visit Ender's Island and you go down to the seaside chapel, you'll discover, well, it was originally Alice Ender's tea house, and a hurricane in the 20s took the roof off, which was flat, and when the Edmondites took over the island in 1954, they created eventually an A-frame roof, so it becomes a beautiful looking little chapel. But there is in that seaside shrine what appears to be an altar against the back wall. And folks that for many years, back in the 60s it started, with Father Joe Waite coming here to find sobriety, people in AA and in 12 Steps have found that shrine a place to let go of the things that were associated with their addiction. So if you go there, I made the mistake once and got into an awful lot of trouble. I went down and I thought somebody had had a picnic down there or something, and I proceeded to clean off the altar. And I got into deep trouble because much of what was on the altar were things very meaningful to people in recovery. Trinkets, beads, a dead flower, different things that symbolize their letting go and letting God take over. And it's probably quite apropos to use that as the background for this laying to rest in the tomb. You know, what is it in our own lives that we need to let go of, that we have no control over? What is it that we need a new beginning? And if we think about that, you'll notice there's a couple candles, vigil candles, and there is another little cross up in the top corner. It's a way of reminding us that we all carry some kind of cross in life, and that God is with us every step of the way. Even what seems to be the dark night of soul and the winter of life will ultimately come into new life. The final station, probably it's inappropriate to call it the 15th station. It is an illumination that basically, in place of a frame that would give the title of a Station of the Cross, it has at the bottom something that is tied with St. Edmund of Canterbury, and it is part of an illumination that Jed Gibbons also did of the patron of the Ebondites, and that is St. Edmund and the words As Figuras Odyssey, which means teach these figures. And next to it on the left side of those words is the three-ring sign for the Trinity. And Edmund, as part of his biographers tell it, had a dream. His mother Mabel appeared to him in a dream when he was a teacher in Oxford and in Paris, teaching mathematics, and he was told in the dream that he should teach these figures, and the symbol of the Trinity kept coming, and his mother kept saying, don't teach geometry, teach theology. So it's as a result of this dream that in which his mother appears. She's also sent him to school, by the way, with hair shirts, so he was very focused on faith. But that's kind of a humorous aside that you're meant to laugh at home. But here he is. He takes seriously that dream, and he goes off and studies it in Paris to be a priest, and he's ordained. Ultimately, he will become the treasurer of the Salisbury Cathedral and finally the Archbishop of Canterbury. And here he is kneeling before Christ the King, who has an image of the Assumption of the blood of Mary. And the background is this steeple of this building in which these illuminations hang. And on the border are a couple bells. The bell that hangs and rings during for the Angelus and for Mass is a bell that came some years ago when we first acquired the island, and that bell has been retained in the new building. What had happened is, over time, the place where we had Mass, which is currently used for our offices, as people come to the island, you'll go in and you'll see a beautiful crucifix, you'll see a couple statues, and it is part of the sanctuary of what had been for many years our chapel here on the island. Mrs. Enders had it as her art studio, and it served us well, but it only held about 50 people. And as our programs here at Enders Island grew, the need for a larger chapel developed. And so the Morrissey family was very instrumental in supplying the funds that were needed to build this absolutely incredible facility. And so as folks come to visit Enders, I hope they'll spend time to come into the chapel. There are many things here besides the illuminations worthy of your time. We have a statue, for example, of Mary with little figures around the base, which is meant to be somewhat of a replica of the statue of Mary that is in Pontigny, the place of foundation of the Ebondites, in which we originally came into existence. So we celebrate at the very end the great rebirth of the faith, and we probably, I think, an appropriate thing to end with is simply, God has given us many gifts. How are we using those gifts to build up our own spiritual life and the life of others in our church?